Hi there, my name is Erin Soderberg Downing. I am the author of the Great Peach Experiment series. The second book in this series, The Peach Pit, comes out on April 26th, and I'm super excited to be visiting with my friends at Boulder Bookstore for this Q&A about the second book in the Peach series. Okay, so here are the questions. So a little synopsis of The Peach Pit. Now, to do this, I have to do a quick synopsis of the first book in the series, which is called When Life Gives You Lemons, Make Peach Pie. So, super quick rundown on what this one is about. After about 2 years after the death of their mom, the three Peach kids, Lucy, who's 12, Freddie, who's 10, and Herb is 8, find out that one of the things that their mom had been working on before she died, she was an inventor, has just sold for $1 million. So in this book, Dad uses part of that money to take the kids on a trip around the Midwest selling pie out of a used food truck. So in the second book, The Peach Pit, the Peaches have returned to their hometown of Duluth, Minnesota, which happens to be my hometown as well. And they find out that their sort of kooky, interesting great aunt has decided to move out of her dilapidated old mansion and give it to the Peach family, but asks one thing in return. She wants them to fix it up and make it a working B&B. So that is the premise of this book. The Peaches need to basically roll up their sleeves and embark on their second experiment of turning their great aunt's old mansion into a working bed and breakfast. All right, so on to question 2. What inspired me to write this book? I was inspired to write the Peach series originally by actually a what if moment. That's where most of my stories come from. So I was on a road trip with my family, and my kids convinced me to buy one of these horrible scratch off lottery tickets. No one ever wins on these things. But before we scratched it off, my kids and I took some time to think about what if we actually did one? What would we do if we suddenly had like $1 million? Well, I would use it to travel. So that is sort of where the original idea for the series, The Great Peach Experiment, came from, is how would I travel? And during the pandemic, my kids and I actually, and my husband, who doesn't tend to get very high billing when I tell these stories, we rented an RV and traveled part of the way around Lake Superior in it to see what it would be like to live out of a cramped little space and how would we handle each other. So that's actually where the research for the first Peach book came in. I figured out what it would be like to take a family and cram them into a tiny space like a food truck or an RV and travel around. So in the second Peach book, I wanted to return them back to their regular lives and see how they could sort of take the bonding that happened in the first book and start to apply it to their regular life. So in this one, they're kind of figuring out what this new life without their mom and starting to figure out how to be a family of 4 together, what that looks like. But also, since they're very creative and inventive, the Peaches have this big renovation to do as part of it. The other fun thing that happens in this book is I wanted to make sure that each character in the story had their own story arc because it's told from alternating points of view. So each of the kids gets every other chapter or every third chapter. So I needed to make sure that each of these characters had their own personal thing going on. So Herb, who's 8, wishes he could have a little more responsibility in the family and actually ends up getting a job at Great Aunt Lucinda's retirement community, helping water plants and feed the animals in the lobby and things like that. So that's super fun. There's a whole cluster of older women that he befriends, and they give him a lot of advice on things. Then Freddie is working toward winning a citywide art competition, and he's trying to build this giant installment that is his sort of dream treehouse. And then Lucy in this book, the bedroom that she gets in the Peach Pit is at the very tippy top of the house. And she finds out that there is a secret door into an attic. And up in that attic are all kinds of old treasures. And Lucy ends up finding a treasure map and starts to sort of follow that and try to figure out what could be buried, what kinds of secrets are hidden within the Peach Pit walls. Okay, so that is sort of where I got the ideas for this story, and what inspired me to write the book. Now, the next question is, did I have to do any research into house building and renovation or the running of bed and breakfasts to write this book? Well, I have stayed at plenty of bed and breakfasts in my life, so I like to consider that sort of research that's built up over the years. In terms of construction, I have owned a number of 100-plus-year-old homes. And so there are a whole host of things that come with that, all kinds of construction projects that I've gone through in my adult life. But conveniently, while I was writing The Peach Pit, we were renovating our basement. So I was able to ask the carpenters all kinds of questions throughout that process. But one of the funnest things that happened and ended up sort of leading to a couple of chapters in The Peach Pit where they find strange, mysterious things hidden behind the walls is one day our group of carpenters came upstairs and told us that they had found something surprising hidden in the wall that they just broke down. Well, it was this old machete, like an old rusted machete. Here's my son holding it. He ended up trying to polish it up and used it to chop down flowers in my garden. But it led us to wonder who hid that there and why. So all kinds of fun stuff happened during our construction project. The other thing that inspired a chapter in the Peach Pit is one day they're breaking down a wall in the Peach Pit and end up finding a doll head. Now, this is really creepy on a lot of levels, but happens to have been inspired by something that my family and I did. So when we put a new staircase on the front of our house a few years ago, one day the guy who was laying bricks left and there was this big hole. And the next day they were going to cover it up with a big slab of rock. Well, we were too tempted not to put a Barbie head along with a note that says, "I'm watching you," inside this hole. Now, we assume these stairs are probably going to stay there for the next 100 years, but when somebody eventually breaks them down, they are going to find our Barbie head, and they are going to wonder who put it there. So I do use real life a lot for research and also for inspiration in my stories. So I have done a lot of research on home improvement by living through it. But those are some specific events that helped me while I was writing The Peach Pit. All right, question 4. What is my favorite recipe in this book? I have a ton of recipes in the Peach Pit because the family is practicing for what they might serve for breakfast in the new B&B that they're creating. So my kids love to cook. I don't. My husband is also an incredibly good cook and baker. So I actually asked them for help while I was working on the recipes. And I'd say one of my favorite recipes in this one is Cousin Millie's famous apple muffins. My daughter's name is Milla. One of her friends calls her Cousin Millie. I don't know why. So she worked for a long time on developing this apple muffin recipe. And I loved getting to taste all the different iterations as she tried to pull it together as a recipe for this book. So that's one of my favorites. All right, question 5. Do I have more adventures planned for the Peach family? In fact, I do. And I have actually just finished book 3 in the series. It is called Frozen Peaches. And it's about a trip that the Peach family wins to the Ice Hotel in Sweden. This is a place that I spent the night back in my 20s. And I love the setting of the Ice Hotel in Sweden. It's totally magical and super bizarre and is probably my personal worst nightmare now as an adult. But I loved sleeping there, and I have been longing for a story to use that setting in ever since. And as I was writing the second Peach book, I realized that this would be a perfect spot for the Peach family to have their next experiment. So that one comes out in April of 2023, but is already done. So I will look forward to sharing that with Boulder Bookstore as well. All right, question 6. What have I been reading during the pandemic to stay hopeful? Well, I'd say most of the time I actually read pretty uplifting books. I love adult romance, sort of fun adult romantic comedies. But I'd say my favorite books are children's books. It's why I write kids' books, and I also love reading them. So, one of my favorite series, which I have around here somewhere, here we go. I love the Vanderbeekers series, which really was a huge inspiration to me as I was writing the Great Peach Experiment series. So, I read the latest book in the Vanderbeekers series, and I reread some of my other favorite series, like Ramona. I love the Fudge series by Judy Blume. Um, so I tend to read a lot of hopeful family-based stories, especially places like the books like the Vanderbeekers that use a sense of place as a huge character in their book. So in the Vanderbeekers, the city of New York is just as much a character as any of the kids are. And I loved getting a chance to sort of visit one of my favorite places while reading, even when I couldn't get out of the house that much during the pandemic. So I turn to series for comfort whenever I'm struggling with things. All right, the next question. Question 7. Is there anything else I want you to know about my book? Well, one of my favorite parts about the Peach series is that I used my son Henry to draw a lot of the illustrations in these books. So when I was writing the first book in the series, and I told my kids the premise of it, that this family has $1,000,000, and while they use most of it for sensible stuff, they set aside a little bit for fun stuff. And I told my son they decided to buy a used food truck. And he said, "Are you kidding me? If I had $1,000,000, I would like get a butler and have a limo drive me to school every day or something. Or I would travel to the moon, or I'd buy a yacht and take my friends on a trip." Well, he started drawing all of these things. And so throughout the first Peach book, I have Freddie's illustrations, the 10-year-old boy, his illustrations of how he would spend $1,000,000. Well, these illustrations were all done by my son Henry. And Henry did the illustrations in the Peach Pit as well. Probably my favorite is the blueprint of the Peach Pit, because there's all kinds of fun stuff in here. But I love having maps in books. As a writer, it helps me keep things straight while I'm writing. But I think also as a reader, it really helps ground you to be able to look back and say, okay, wait, Herb's room is where? So Henry helped me draw all the illustrations in this book as well. So that's something fun that I love people to know about these stories, is it's really been a huge family project for us. And this series has been created during the pandemic as a real source of comfort and exploration for us as a family. All right, and the final question, can I read us a short passage from my book? Of course I will. I wish I was there in person in Colorado. That is someplace I would love to get soon. But the next best thing is that I will read to you through Boulder Bookstore's YouTube page. Okay, so this is the very beginning of chapter 1 in the Peach Pit, which starts out from Herb Peach's point of view. And this chapter is entitled The Creepy Mansion. Herb Peach was pretty sure his great-aunt Lucinda's house was haunted. There was just something about the massive red brick mansion that gave him the willies. The Peach family visited their great-aunt often, and she herself was always cheerful, friendly, and welcoming. The house? It was not. Maybe it was the way the hall chandelier cast shadows that looked a lot like screaming little faces, or how the creaky old stairs and radiators groaned and moaned even when no one was nearby. Then there were the dusty old portraits hanging on the living room wall with their painted eyes that seemed to watch Herb whenever he rushed past. He also found it strange that the house always smelled like split pea soup and crackers, even though Great Aunt Lucinda didn't even like soup. Whatever the reason, 8-year-old Herb always felt a little skittish inside his great aunt's big, cold house. He looked forward to the moment their dad would say it was time for his family to pile into the car to head back across town to their own small, comfy house. It was always a relief to get home. This was unfortunate. since it sounded like his family would be moving in to the creaky old mansion. All right, so in this first chapter, we learn the premise, which is that Aunt Lucinda is moving out. The Peaches are moving in. So this is a super fun book. I hope people check it out. One thing to know about my series is you can read them in any order. I was a big series reader as a kid, and I loved reading the books out of order. So that's something that I've been very careful about with my books, is that they each stand on their own. All right, thanks so much for hosting me, and I will see you soon.